My name's Anton Grashion. I work for Cylance. I've been in security too long, I think, probably. And I feel I have to explain myself a little bit. You can see the word marketing, and I can see you're all looking a little nervous about that. I'm actually a techie who took a wrong turning at some point. And the reason I'm here today, we're going to be talking about lots of things. So I've got 29 minutes and 11 seconds, and we're going to touch on the economics, we're going to touch on machine learning, artificial intelligence, how people think, the philosophy, how people think, regulation. So we've got a lot to cover in these 28 and 57 seconds. So back in the day, when AI was more A than I did some research into it, and I was actually writing expert systems to determine sand body geometry for oil exploration. My PhD is available from the British Lending Library. You can get it online. I suggest you all go and read it. It's a really good read. You'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll change your life. Back in those days, expert systems were rules-based. They were very rigid, and there was a lot of opposition from human experts to having their jobs replaced by expert systems, and quite rightly, because they were a bit clunky. And to make them a little bit softer, we used things like multivariate statistics. Again, I'm probably going to touch on multivariate statistics. There will be a test at the end of the session. If you want to talk more about any of these subjects, I'll be on our stand for a couple of minutes before I have to fly out later this afternoon. Unprecedented. Without previous instance, never before known or experienced, unexampled or unparalleled. We hear this all the time in cybersecurity. Everything is unprecedented. We've never seen this type of thing before. Growth in threat actors, growth of cybercrime, growth of ZeroDay malware, the skill shortage, the number of breaches. This is from a Verizon report from 2 years ago, actually, but it probably looks like the Verizon report that's only just come out as well. There is a fundamental truism that most things in cybersecurity are unprecedented. It just keeps getting more and more and more. And unfortunately, lots of security companies, and I've worked for a number of security companies, play on this a lot. And it's, selling by fear is the basis of this. And how far have we got by selling by fear? Not very far, actually. Thought I clicked it then. There we go. I'd like to introduce you to this guy. I don't know if any of you know him, Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize, I think, in 2007 for his work on economics, actually. So it ties in nicely with this. What he was really doing was looking at how humans think. And there are two modes of thinking that he defined. Thinking fast and thinking slow, and that's what the book's about. Now, this actually is a good book, and I would recommend you read it if you can't sleep. The other reason I've got Daniel in here as well, he's infinitely quotable, and I'll be using some of his quotes later on. But the thinking fast and slow, very simply, your fast thinking is the stuff that you actually don't think about. It's your instinct. It's the bit that probably keeps you alive. So it's our animal brain from way, way back. So you don't have to have any effort, it just kicks in, you're not aware of it. System 2 thinking, slow thinking, is effortful. You have to use all your intellect to actually apply yourself to a problem. An example of this is if you're not a brilliant mathematical savant and someone asks you to evaluate a quite complicated multiplication and division as you're walking along, you'll stop walking. That's how effortful System 2 thinking is. Now, artificial intelligence and machine learning at the moment are all about System 1 thinking. It's about generating things very, very quickly. Expert systems were there so that they could backtrack and explain a whole line of reasoning, how they came to their conclusion. New neural net type, recurrent neural net systems, they're more of a yes or no. This is the answer. Take it or leave it. I'm not going to give you my reasoning because you wouldn't understand it. So it's something that humans actually can't understand. This quote I really like. People who spend their time and earn their living studying a particular topic produce poorer predictions than dart-throwing monkeys who would have distributed their choices evenly over the options. And to that, this is my monkey dartboard for security predictions. And I've been putting this up, I think, probably for the past 5 years. It hasn't changed. And that's because People will continue to want things in your networks and on your devices. That's what drives the economics of insecurity. Users will continue to make mistakes if we let them. Doing more and different stuff increases risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Old threats hang around. I think, was it the Target breach was a SQL injection? I remember looking at SQL injection in 1999, and yet it's still working for major breaches. So they're still going to hang around. If they're still hanging around and we're removing signatures from our DAT files because the DAT files are getting too big, what implications does that have? Who knows? New threats will emerge all the time, unprecedented, right? Vendors will release more and more products and silver bullets, and security headlines will continue to alarm. Same every year. What we really mean by this is that threats against your business are on the rise. That's a given, right? The board, increasingly, unprecedentedly, has zero tolerance for security issues. And really, when they look down on the organization from their lofty tower, all they really want from security is someone to go, yep, it's okay, we've got it covered, don't worry about it. And obviously, we need to optimize our security strategy. And that's led us to this situation. I've given you a quadrant, because we all like quadrants. The perception, certainly of the board, is that high security is amazingly expensive. We've spent, you keep asking for money, we keep giving you money, we keep getting breached, so we give you more money, and so it's really expensive. The desire of the board, obviously, is to have really high security at low cost. Not an unreasonable desire for a board to have. The reality, unfortunately, is we're in the bottom quadrant, where we've spent more and more and more on security, yet we keep spending more and more and more on security. The inescapable conclusion of that is we're not that secure, are we? We've let things through, or we have to keep patching things over. Stuart McClure, who's our founder, used to be the CTO of McAfee, and he called himself the Chief Apology Officer, because it was his job, he says, to fly around the world, explain why people have had a breach, and maybe they should invest some more money with them. I don't think that's unique to McAfee at all. I think it's across the board. And it's because we've given up on prevention. Because prevention demonstrably hasn't worked, right? But I think we've actually run too far over to the detect and respond side at the neglect of this. And I'm going to take you through a journey today, which I hope will explain my reasoning around that. So how have we got to this perception versus reality piece in our economic behavior? Well, here's our layered defense, and we've created nice little overlaps, so if things drop through, they hopefully will get caught by the other bit. We've got AV in our email systems, on our firewall sometimes, and on the endpoint, and maybe on the servers as well. So I'll just use AV as an example. So if a threat comes in, even if it misses the first thing, because the first thing wasn't even supposed to detect it, that's fine, that's good. That's what Defenseindepth means. Then we can reject that. Super. And that's where we've ended up here. So we've spent a lot of money, we've got lots of individual pieces, and this we might call, this is the best in breed sort of approach. So you've gone for each individual component, which is the best in that breed, and therefore you've ended up with all your different management consoles. Maybe there's a little bit of coordination and orchestration, which is good, which brings the cost down. But really, that's the sort of situation that we've found ourselves in. Unfortunately, we can't always predict how well that overlap actually works. And so if it's just not quite as good as we were thinking in one area, then things will get through. If they get through, and I'll use this analogy a lot, what we do is we chase cost from the beginning, from when we could have prevented it, into the network. And once it's in the network, we've got a much, much bigger problem. The Americans use the analogy of you can't re-can a can of worms once you've opened it. Well, you can. And the only way of doing it is to get a bigger can. So every time you do this, you have to get a bigger and bigger can. So that's where you drive cost into your network. And that's where we've ended up in this situation where we spend a lot of money on lots and lots of different tools, but we still not as secure as we hoped. So what's the solution to this? Well, the analysts, Gartner or IDC, I was talking to Duncan Brown at IDC the other day. They had a dinner. And one of the things they're promoting very strongly at the moment is go for a platform approach. So go for a single vendor that's got all the solutions. So it's sort of good enough in most of the areas, and you'll save money is what you're doing. And so that's their advice to CISOs at the moment. And so here's our platform. And if we look at the previous situation, each of those individual elements has an amount of CapEx and an amount of OpEx that's attracted to them, right? So this is where we've got our high-cost model. Go to a platform approach, and you can compress that down because you've got a big saving in CapEx, theoretically. So you don't have to buy all the individual pieces themselves. You buy them as a big block or subscribe to them or however you're going to get them. But your OpEx savings should be huge because, and not all platform vendors have a single console, but if they did have a single console, then your OpEx would drop right down because you've got that one version of truth that runs all your security operations, which would be brilliant. However, these savings can be negated, and it gets back to what are we thinking about? And what I've done here is I've broken down the sort of capabilities of elements within the platform, because you're not going for a best of breed now. If we drew this, if this was a normal distribution, so the bottom left for you, if you've got best of breed, you expect to be really strong with the feature set, the core feature set of that technology. However, if you're then building into a platform, by necessity, you're not going to be best of breed. Therefore, you're going to have slight gaps. You're going to have strengths in maybe some of the peripheral areas, some of the more edge features of the technology themselves. So you really can't predict where those overlaps are actually protecting you and where they're not protecting you. And therefore, if you've got a hole in the center of this, and I'll use AV as an example, ZeroDay Malware is just going to drop straight through into the network, and now you're recanning your can of worms. And I was talking to a bunch of CISOs about this last year, I think, in London, and they said, you can't be 100% certain you're going to stop everything. I said, absolutely not. No one can stop 100% of threats. However, and the analogy I used was, if you're in a rowing boat and there's a hole in the bottom of your boat and the water's coming in, the first thing you should do is try and reduce the flow of water to the bare minimum. The thing you don't want to do is go and buy a bigger and bigger bucket to try and bail the water out. And that's the situation we're in right now. We're bailing as fast as we can. We're driving complexity into the network because we're not very good at stopping things in the first place. And so there's a recent study by Deloitte. You can't really see that. It's a bit small. Deloitte did a study about 2 or 3 breaches in the States. And they came to the conclusion that 90% of the cost of that breach, 90%, in fact, it was 96 in one case, over 90% of the cost of a breach is in the business implications of the breach, not in all the technology stuff that we have to do, not in the cleanup, not in the forensics, not in chasing everything down, but in the business implications of that. Lost business, damage to the shareholder price, regulatory fines. That's a colossal amount of money. So if you then get breached, so if you let this thing through, we know that we can do the detect and respond, we can do all the forensics and all the cleanup, you've still attracted that 90%. So your cost savings of your platform, blown away. Absolutely. And this is at a time of skill shortage. It's going to get better in a minute, by the way, and I know this is getting a bit gloomy. But this is at a time of skill shortage. So the availability of specialist staff, we know, is hard. We're all fishing in the same pool, right? Vendors are fishing in the same pool as your organizations, as the channel. And in fact, the channel is a great way of augmenting your skill shortage because they can aggregate that up and offer you some respite in there. Complexity in our organizations, complexity in cybersecurity is absolutely on an exponential rise. What we need to do is move that complexity curve. Let's simplify things a little bit and buy ourselves some time before they cross over and before we're actually in a chaotic situation. Let's talk about risk. This is the business we're in, right? Are there any governance, risk, and compliance people in the audience today? Good, I'll get away with what I'm going to say now then, that's excellent. They get a bit nervous when I start talking about risk. Risk is all about what you can do. In fact, you can do lots of things with risk, right? You can mitigate it, which is what we do. We buy stuff, technology, to mitigate risk. You can stop doing the risky thing, which is probably not an option. Remember back to my predictions, I said doing more and different things increases your risk in general. And to be competitive in this day and age, we have to adopt different work practices. We allow people to work from home remotely, whatever it is, we allow contractors to come into the network themselves. That's just going to get more risky, right? So we either mitigate it, we stop doing it, we can share it. So we can share it with service providers, for instance, or we can buy insurance. Increasingly, cyber insurance is an option for that irreducible amount of risk, the risk that you can't get rid of, you just have to accept, and therefore you try and mitigate it in a different way through insurance. So we've got a graph here, we've got our risk plotted on there with time, and at T0, a new malware variant suddenly pops up, and our risk shoots up because we haven't got any cover for this, right? So this is new, 0 day, my risk's gone up. And we then have a period of time, a variable period of time, where we're vulnerable. And that's your known vulnerability window. Until a signature comes out, and at T-sig, we apply the patch, because that doesn't take long, does it? In fact, I was talking to a CISO of I think it was a 100,000 seat company the other day, and he reckoned that anything new that comes out, it takes him 5 days to roll it out across his entire organization. So your vulnerability window can actually stretch operationally, not due to the vendors being slow. Problem we've got there is we've also got an unknown vulnerability window. That's when the malware was first seen. That doesn't mean that's when it was first in everyone's network. There's a big difference there. So you've got this unknown vulnerability window, and if there were any GRC people in the audience, and I asked the question, what's the worst risk to have, they would say, one that we're not aware of. Because if you're not aware of it, you're not doing any of those things. We're not accepting it. In fact, we're unconsciously accepting it, basically. We're not mitigating it. We can't mitigate it because we don't know what it is. We can't share it because we don't know what it is. We can't buy insurance for it because we don't know what it is. So that's the worst risk we can have. The risk of unknown vulnerabilities or unknown malware is one of the worst that we can have. And it's just a fact of our lives. So if we look at tied protection, it gets even worse. It is going to get better in a minute, believe me. But if we look at, so this is our same graph, risk gone up, V0. So version 0 of the malware has come out. And the patch comes out, or the signature, or whatever it might be, risk drops down, great. We all know, you all know in this room, that creating variants of malware is trivial these days. You've probably seen a lot of the demos of malware as a service or ransomware as a service, one of my particular favorites. You can just keep creating new versions of it as fast as you can click. In fact, you can automate that with a script as well. So you can generate swathes of this stuff that, all right, so argument against that, maybe your AV uses heuristics. And so you will catch some of those variants. You won't catch all of them. We can pack, so you can go and talk to Rasham over on our stand, and there are ways of actually packing and deforming malware so that it will actually surpass and exploit any of the AV systems themselves. So zero-day malware and the multiplicity of types of malware that we're getting is really a problem. So what we need to do, we need to think beyond what we know about security. We need actually an unprecedented approach to this. And we need to start with a clean sheet of paper. It's almost impossible to take what we've got, bolt some sort of artificial intelligence into it and say, ta-da, this is the answer. It can't be. There are always two ways of using tools, right? The right way and the wrong way. And I know because I'm a DIY idiot. So nail guns, for instance. I've got a nail gun. And nail guns are great at nailing things really quickly. Or you can take the nail gun and you can hammer a nail in with the bottom of the nail gun. If we're bolting artificial intelligence into legacy tools, that's what we're doing. It's not very bright. Another Daniel Kahneman, overconfident professionals sincerely believe they have expertise, act as experts, and look like experts. You'll have to struggle to remind yourself they may be in the grip of an illusion. I would include myself in this, so take everything, be skeptical about everything that you're told. Opinions, however, on AI are divided, and we've either got a utopian view or a dystopian view. The only image I could find of a utopian artificial intelligence future is Robbie the robot delivering maple pancakes to some human being. Dystopian views, though, you can knock yourself out finding these. Robots that'll hunt you down through the forest and kill you. This is Elon Musk, by the way. He's not looking in a washing machine there. That's actually SpaceX, so that's his super-duper rocket. He thinks that could be the end of all civilization, which is interesting, seeing as Teslas use artificial intelligence to do their self-driving, but never mind. Or, alternatively, we laugh at it. Oh, look at the silly robot. It can't even stack shelves without falling over. Pfft, nothing to worry about here. So there's a lot of confliction in here, and analysts are conflicted about it as well. This is a slide from the Gartner conference last year in London. The two dogs, one AI program identified the dog on the left as a dog, the dog on the right, which has been subtly changed, as an ostrich. Okay? Preposterous. And they do say that, oh, right, well, we've had all these things and they got bypassed, but, oh, machine learning. Oh, but what about machine learning malware? What about AI attacking AI? Well, I can tell you one thing about that. Two things. First thing is we look for AI attacking AI, which is quite an interesting thing in itself. But also, if your AI system gets attacked by AI, what do you think the best defense to that would be? It's AI. It becomes self-referential because it's not human understandable anymore. So the only chance you've got if AI attacks AI is with AI. And the reason analysts are a little bit on the fence about this, they're very nervous. What if it doesn't work? What if it's not the right thing? We make our money out of this, therefore we've got to hedge our bets a little bit. But I think AI and machine learning have to be part of the solution. You start by collecting a colossal amount of data. That data has to be representative of the real world. If it isn't, we end up with something called an overfit model. And an overfit model is brilliant at detecting what happens in the training set. You put it into the real world, and it's awful. Right? So if your training set isn't big enough, it's not going to be good enough. We extract the features. We then transform, vectorize, and train. And I'm saying this, throwing this away. This is incredibly difficult. This is where the real magic happens. Classifying, clustering to good and bad. And then you use machine learning to dissect the malwares. That's a little bit of that's a marketing thing. I apologize for that. But it is looking at the malware's DNA. And artificial intelligence then determines if the code's safe to run. I'm not trying to tell whether it's a dog or an ostrich. I'm just looking at a binary decision. Is this good or is it bad? And that's where having a massive training set and a huge amount of elastic compute can actually help you. And I encourage you, you'll get these slides at the end. Go and play at this website. This gives you a recurrent neural net to play with, and you can play with various training factors and different algorithms, and you can see how it coalesces on a solution. It's actually quite interesting if neural nets are something that gets you out of bed in the morning. What this gives you then, because we don't have to have seen the malware to actually protect against it, it throws out an event horizon into the future. And so we don't care how many variants of that malware there are, because they'll get caught. They just have to, because there's only so many ways of writing software. And not only that, every 6 months, build another model, and you throw another event horizon out in front of you as well. And the power of this is to show a tangible example. We took some of our favorite ransomware, Zcryptor, GoldenEye, Petya, WannaCry, my particular favorite, from 2002 from 2017, one from 2016. An engine that we made in 2015 blocked all of these. So it wasn't even in existence when these were written. And that's the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning, when you get it right, and it's very easy not to get it right. It isn't easy. We've got all sorts of patents. You've actually got to start, you've sort of got to start as a data science company that does cybersecurity rather than the other way around, because you need the data scientists who can actually do this stuff, and it's not a trivial matter. One of my favorites is the top one here, wavelet decomposition of software entropy to identify malware. What this does, simply, is it looks at a executable file and maps as a wave the entropy of that file. And by entropy, we mean what's the sort of ratio between code, white space, encrypted space, any of the headers in there. And you actually end up with a continuous variable, this wavelet of entropy. And you can actually subject that then down to a single number, but at different levels of focus. And if you do that, if all you used was that one feature, you would be 60% right in identifying malware or not, which is amazing, right? That's outrageous. We use, to train the model, 300 million features. Combinations of features, presence, absence of other features, continuous features, 300 million features. That then compresses down on the deployed model to about 100,000. And that 100,000, once you do the presence, absence, continuous variables, is around about 2 million. There's a lot of nonsense talked about AI as well, and it gets to a point where my dad's better than your dad because we've got more features than you. The reason you need so many features is actually not necessarily for discerning whether something's malware or not, but it makes it almost impossible to try and game the situation. So how many of these millions of features are you going to change in order to evade detection? And that's the wavelets. I just forgot that was in there. So changing the economics. GDPR, everyone's favorite topic at the moment. Again, a lot of rubbish talked by security companies about GDPR. 95%, 98% of GDPR is about process and procedures and people. A tiny amount is about security. I think they say you've got to have state-of-the-art security. And I guess we all have to look at ourselves and say, have I got state-of-the-art security? Or have I got all the same stuff that I've been doing all the time that hasn't left me secure? Anyway, the last time you have any free will in a regulatory situation is before the breach. After the breach, you're on rails. You have to do your operational escalation. So you've got to do your forensics and your cleanup. You've got to do your notifications to your board, to the regulator, to the data subject potentially, to everybody else, to the press, which is always lots of fun. And then there are the implications, either fines or lost business. And we know that 90% of the cost, according to Deloitte, are concentrated down there. Doesn't it make sense to try and reduce those number of breaches to a diminishingly small minimum? I think so. And the cost goes up exponentially as your reputation takes the hit as soon as the notification comes out. So, in conclusion, we need software that predicts and blocks cyber attacks pre-execution on the endpoint in real time using artificial intelligence. And that can radically change, because if you can, I'm not saying you're going to stop everything, but if you can stop more, it changes your requirement downstream. What does your sort of EDR requirement look like if you're stopping more and more stuff? I would suggest it looks very different itself. And I believe that's unprecedented. I've got 30 seconds left, and I'll use dank u wel. That's my only Dutch word other than swearing, which I won't do that. But thank you very much for your attention. You've been very kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anton. I'm an outsider, right? But it sounds to me like a rat race. So what happens when the prediction is predicted?
The prediction of, explain a little bit further than that.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you, more and more you're able to predict, to predict where it comes, and that helps you.
Yeah.
But you know, that's all included. We go on, and
Absolutely, yeah. We're in
the prediction will be predicted.
Well, we're in a position of diminishing returns right now. So we've got up to a point, and again, this gets arguable and gets into a bit of a bun fight. We're around about 99-point-something% accurate now. And so every time we build a model, we're spending more and more and more on bigger and bigger models to give us tiny incremental improvements. Eventually, the bad guys will cotton onto this. It's expensive to do, but they've got money. You need a huge amount of computing power. I think we're one of the major users of Amazon Web Services when we build the model. But yeah, it's a continuous battle,
yeah.
Absolutely.
A continuous story. Yeah. Any questions for Anton?
I'll be on our stand if anyone's got any.
You
questions.
are, yes.
If you want to talk about AI and multivariate statistics, n-dimensional hyperellipsoids, Markov analysis, I'm your man.
Thank you so much for coming over.
Cheers.
Anton Grashion.